personal favorite is the Ashan-Ti Empire, a very tough, cunning, and impressive empire that ruled over the area corresponding roughly to what is now modern-day Ghana, between the years of 1670 and 1902. The British were fascinated by the Ashanti both before and after they were colonized, and for good reason. The Ashanti Empire has produced some strong, impressive, and even legendary people. In an effort to modernize the empire's political organization, King Kwaku Dua I reluctantly sent two representatives, Owusu-Ansah and Owusu-Nkwanta-Bisi, to Britain in 1836 to receive an education. They would remain in Britain for 5 years before returning back to the Ashanti Empire. Kwasi Boachi and Kwame Poku were Ashanti princes who were also sent to Europe, but these two were comfortably sent to the Netherlands, an ally of the Ashanti Empire. They would travel there to receive a Dutch education and training as part of a treaty signed between the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Ashanti Kingdom. Kwasi would willingly remain in the Netherlands, later studying mining engineering in Freiburg, and eventually become the chief mining engineer of the Dutch East Indies. Kwame Poku, on the other hand, traveled back to the Ashanti Kingdom as agreed upon. All of this was part of a greater effort by the Ashanti leadership to educate its administration, as they began to see how increasingly important it was to have a literate society. They even employed a corps of Arabic scribes to record and organize important administrative information, with the goal of establishing a chancery. Eventually, sending ambassadors to Britain fell far from the empire's priorities. After several years of warfare with the British, the kingdom had one last uprising, led by warrior queen Ya Asante-Wa. Asante-Wa led the last armed resistance against the British in the year 1902, with the goal of protecting the Golden Stool, a symbol of the Ashanti nation. After 6 months of war with thousands of casualties on both sides, the war finally came to an end, with the Ashanti Kingdom being annexed into the British Empire. The British recorded this as a victory on their side, due to the annexation of the Ashanti Empire, while the Ashanti themselves view it as a victory for them, being successful in protecting the Golden Stool from falling into the hands of the British. Speaking of the Golden Stool, that brings us to the most legendary story in all of Ashanti history, with some seemingly mythical parts of it bearing physical evidence to date. Legend has it that Anochi was born in the late 1600s, with his hands firmly held together and could not be separated. He was found to be holding totem poles from the gods. Later in his life, he claimed the title of Okomfo, or priest, and possessed unparalleled spiritual strength. The Golden Stool, the symbol of the Ashanti people, is believed to have been summoned by him from the heavens. This miracle is what united the smaller Akan states together to form the Ashanti Empire and overthrow the tyrannical Dingyawar Kingdom. To this day, a palm tree grows outside of his former home, where burned impressions of his feet can be viewed on its bark, where he apparently climbed it barefoot. Perhaps the most impressive of Anochi's feats is when he lunged a dagger into the heartland of the Ashanti Empire. I know this doesn't sound like much, but this is where it gets a little crazy. Despite numerous efforts throughout the years, no one has been able to remove it. And after failed attempts at excavating it, the Kumasi Teaching Hospital built around it, where it can still be viewed there today. The Ashanti people were a highly militant yet benevolent people, valuing law and order. The Ashanti government allowed its citizens the rights to a proper prosecution, and despite their militaristic culture, they strongly valued peace and knew how to draw the line when peace was necessary over war. In fact, tributary demands from their vassals was discussed on a case-by-case basis, dependent on the wealth of the vassals in question. But that said, goods such as gold and slaves were not demanded in high numbers from relatively rural or underdeveloped areas. Taxes would be constantly reevaluated as situations changed, and was done to ensure that these provinces could live relatively comfortably without being completely depleted of their resources. Crime within the empire was kept under tight control by a very efficient police force. There were even highway policemen who would inspect and interrogate all travelers and collect tolls. There was a common saying that highlighted the efficiency of the Ashanti police force. If you leave a crime behind you on a journey, you will meet it ahead of you. Law was so strictly enforced, citizens knew that they were better off reporting crimes rather than letting them go ignored, as they'd be punished for withholding information pertaining to it. In fact, In 1820, a British visitor lost a valuable gold seal. Once the king was informed, he ensured the visitor that it would be promptly found and returned. After a gong was sounded, the seal was returned to the British visitor within an hour. Prosecutions were laid out in a fair and impartial manner, which would be conducted in an imperial court system. Capital punishment could be issued only by the king after a proper trial was held. Decapitation was conducted on those found guilty, as the Ashan-Ti believed that the head was the vessel of the soul. Even those who committed suicide were decapitated for disobeying the strict law of taking a life without the king's ruling. The Ashan-Ti law was modeled around the morals and principles of their religion. They believed in one supreme sky god, whom they called Nyame, and lesser spirits whom they called Abosom, which assisted humans down on Earth. The symbol of Nyame can still be found today, popularly worn by Akan people and their diaspora. Despite the tensions between the two, British explorers would often remark upon how impressive and advanced the Ashan-Ti kingdom was in comparison to other sub-Saharan African states. The Ashan-Ti Empire contains a complex network of road systems, which required an enormous amount of daily laborers to construct and manage. Constructing these road systems was not an easy task. It was an incredible feat, as they had to be cut through dense and unforgiving jungle. Given the location of the Ashan-Ti Empire being primarily in the tropical rainforests, roads would quickly be reclaimed by vegetation, if not maintained daily. The Ashan-Ti Empire was also exceptional in the fact that it adopted firearms on a full scale very early on in its history. In fact, from 1870 to 1872, as the Ashan-Ti prepared for an impending war with the British, they purchased over 18,000 muskets and 29,000 kegs of gunpowder from the Dutch. They also had a local weapons repair industry, where blacksmiths would repair guns to counteract the popular occurrence of European traders shipping defective guns to African nations during that time period. Perhaps one of the most simple, yet still impressive technological accomplishments of the Ashan-Ti was the talking drum, or dando, common in West Africa. The Ashan-Ti spoke a language known as Twi. Similar to most West African languages, Twi is a tonal language, which means that the simple change in the tone of your voice can produce a completely different word. Talking drums had leather cords that could be adjusted in order to change the tone of the drum. With that said, messages could be conveyed over immense distances by mimicking the Twi language, simply from the tone of the drum, without the use of any actual words. Though the drum could only communicate with tones, it was enough to transmit simple words and phrases, in a similar fashion to the way we use emojis in text messages. At the time, the talking drum was analogous to the European telegraph, yet far more effective. This technology was useful for calls to arms or warnings to neighboring cities and villages. According to a British explorer by the name of Bowditch, all of the main buildings of Kumasi had upstairs toilets that would be flushed by pouring buckets of boiling water into the bowl. As I just mentioned, the toilets were located upstairs, meaning these buildings were often multiple stories high, despite the popular belief that African people only constructed one-story buildings, or other structures indicative of an agrarian society. Like most of West Africa, they were constructed of adobe or wattle and dub, due to the lack of availability of stone in much of that part of Africa. Adobe brick was an excellent insulator from the hot and humid climate of tropical Africa, prior to the advent of modern air conditioning units. Mud brick is prone to deteriorating over time from rain and humidity, so requires constant maintenance. As a countermeasure to this, the Ashan-Ti developed an advanced mixture for construction, which incorporated palm oil as a means of waterproofing the buildings and significantly increasing their durability. They would also be painted with an iconic white plaster to further protect them from the harsh rainstorms of West Africa. When describing Ashan-Ti architecture, it goes hand in hand with their art, with walls and pillars of Ashan-Ti buildings incorporating beautiful reliefs and symbols which they call adinkra. Adinkra is a system of indigenous Ashanti symbols that represent words, phrases, objects, or aphorisms. They were incorporated not just into architecture, but also clothing, pottery, and sculptures. Most artistic pieces created by the Ashanti were made of gold, which is not surprising considering the empire's fabulously large wealth of the mineral. In fact, at its peak, some 40,000 mines were being worked throughout the country by men, women, and children. Perhaps one of the most iconic and recurring pieces of Ashanti art is a gold amulet called the Afro-Roots, or soul washer. Soul washers are given to select individuals whom were born on the same day of the week as the king. Their purpose was to ward off evil spirits from the king, and these beautiful pieces were worn as badges to symbolize their title in the royal court. The Ashanti Empire also contained artistic pieces from other parts of the world, including a medieval English ewer, which was missing for centuries. This priceless piece was one of 3 such containers crafted in 14th century England, as evidenced by the coat of arms found on the necks of the containers. After the colonization of the Ashanti Empire by the British, it was found in the royal palace of Kumasi and was described by one of the soldiers as being mixed into a pile of objects indiscriminately of being common or valuable. Surprisingly enough, the ewer of the Ashanti was in better condition than the other 2 ewers, as it still contained the original fragile lid, while the others did not, only containing their hinges. To this day, historians are still baffled as to how the ewer ended up thousands of miles away in the middle of a sub-Saharan African kingdom. So while we're on the topic of the colonization of the Ashanti, let's discuss their military. The Ashanti were the only West African army to defeat a European power in more than one major engagement, in addition to several small battles in a period that spanned around 100 years. In fact, the Ashanti even captured a British fort during the Ga-Ashanti War of 1811. The success of the Ashanti Empire's military is attributed to the fact that firearms were adopted early on in its history, on top of an already highly militaristic culture. Not to mention, they frequently fought with enemy kingdoms to the south and the east, who also possessed firearms such as the Fante and the Dahomey kingdoms, which would naturally breed a disciplined and battle-hardened army. Warriors were strictly disciplined and risked floggings or death if they attempted to flee from battle. In fact, a common phrase recited by warriors during battle went as follows: "If I go forward, I die. If I flee, I die. Better to go forward and die in the mouth of battle." Prior to the adoption of firearms, traditional weapons such as bows and swords were the norm. The introduction of guns caused local blacksmiths to divert their talents towards gun repair and maintenance. Indigenous swords such as the Akrafena fell completely out of use in the Ashanti military, which was ironically the deciding factor in many battles lost against the British, who would defeat the Ashanti forces with successive bayonet charges. Another exceptional aspect of the Ashanti army was the deployment of combat medics, who would tend to wounded warriors during battle. Incorporation of medics in combat was a new concept, even for European armies at the time. Today, a relic of British and Ashanti rivalry can be seen in the former British colonies of the Caribbean, such as Jamaica and St. Kitts. A local dialect known as Patois has features heavily influenced from Twi and other West African languages to a lesser extent. The former Ashanti warriors were known to have a strong tendency of creating large-scale slave rebellions against their masters in the Caribbean, even escaping and creating their own towns in the mountains of Jamaica. Koromansi was a name assigned to these particular slaves due to their reputation. These uprisings were so frequent that a bill was even passed to prevent the importation of Ashanti slaves, but was denied by the British government. But back on the Ashanti, even with the advent of modern weapons such as repeating rifles, Gatling guns, and explosive artillery, the British still had great difficulty conquering the Ashanti, and it wasn't until 1902 that they fully subjugated the kingdom into the colony of British Gold Coast. So guys, what do you think? Were you impressed by what you learned, or did you learn anything new at all?
Hell no. They got most of their guns and their technology from the white man.
Yeah, other cultures like the Japanese can do it, but it's only a problem if Africans do it, right? Anyway.
Yeah. Ghana. I'm so cool, I went to Africa. Back at school, they would laugh at us. Now it's cool to be black as fuck. Now it's cool to be from Africa, huh? Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. It's so cool to be from Africa. It's so cool to be from Africa. I'm so cool, I went to Africa. Back at school, they would laugh at us. Tell the truth, it was cruel. Now it's too cool to be black as fuck. Now it's cool to be from Africa. Now it's cool to be from Africa. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Met the coolest youth with stamina. Eat the sweetest fruits, I'm matching up. Had some bomb cool, ate some food with some good stew belly bus. Kelly Welle ate some red with some jollof enough. Plantain made me cuckoo, so much good food, man, ate too much. Yam chips too added up. Man, don't be mad at us. I took a plane from Canada. I can't complain, I landed, bruh. Soon as I landed, they handed up. All of that hate ain't adding up. I took my words and just backed it up. It's always been cool to be black as fuck. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. It's so cool to be from Africa. It's so cool to be from Africa. It's so cool to be from Africa, huh? Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Strongest backs, they manage enough. Too cool, they balance food with no hands. This ain't a bluff. Next strong, they very tough. Made me just level up. It's always been cool to be black as fuck. It's always been cool to be black as fuck. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. The women intelligent, beautiful, fit, and hella thick, yeah. Dripped in melanin, sun kissed, it's evident, yeah. The men real gentlemen, so fine, so eloquent. Melanin dipped in elegance. Ghana is so heaven sent. Homer real medicine. Homer black excellence. Gain independence. By Ghana's first president. Kwame Nkrumah represents freedom with no hesitance. Justice and no settling. Let just settle in. All of the riches from Africa. Met the coolest kids in Africa, boy. All of the wealth is in Africa. Buy some land and sell all of your toys. I need to get out of Canada. Create a business, now you self-employed. Your money will stretch like it's algebra. This is the truth, man. This ain't a ploy. Strongest backs, they manage enough. Too cool, they balance food with no hands. This ain't a bluff. Next strong, they very tough. Made me just level up. It's always been cool to be black as fuck. Always been cool to be black as fuck. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up. It's so cool to be from Africa. It's so cool to be from Africa. It's so cool to be from Africa, huh? Went to Ghana, now I'm acting up.
You know, they taught me words like Madase, Apauta, Premi. Went to Ghana.
Biblical post-hypnotic suggestions. I'm not talking about 1,000 years. I'm talking about 2,700-year-old suggestion that they're responding to now. And we could actually film these people and match the prophecy with the events. And the reason it should matter is that because once they do what they have to do, they trigger the apocalypse.